Okay, in this video, we're going to start from this 3D model that I've created in Rhino of a little stool, piece of furniture, and create a set of shop drawings that we would use to build it from. Now, I wanted to point out one other thing that I didn't mention in the previous video, which is that we can also adjust. So one of these, the main technique that I talked about for modeling the joints was to use Boolean operations, Boolean subtractions to carve out kind of the pieces where they would intersect, so we can, essentially model what the real joints would be like. Now let's imagine that we are modeling it, but we're learning about the design and we're needing to change things as we go. So, it doesn't mean that you have to completely redo this member. For example, if I wanted to move this joint slightly to one side or another, one of the techniques that is really, really super helpful in Rhino is a command called move edge. So let's say I wanted to change the dimension of this lap joint so it wasn't a split 50-50, but I wanted it to be a little bit, shifted to one side or another. If I use the command move edge, first it'll ask me what edges I want to select. So I'll go ahead and, drag my mouse to just select the inside edges of both. So that's both the edges of this member and the edges of this member on the adjoining face. And so once I have the edges selected, I'll press enter. And then I can kind of drag it, right? So I can drag it over this way, or I can drag it over that way. And I can tap tab on the keyboard to lock it into a certain direction, right? As I'm dragging, if I say I want to move it just in this plane or in this direction, I can snap to something along that line and hit tab. And now you can see I'm locked into that direction. Then I can snap to the midpoint there. So you can pretty easily, adjust any of these pieces. And there's actually an even shorter shortcut, which is if you hold Control and Shift on the keyboard and drag and select, or even click and select, it'll allow you to select like faces of objects and move them, just like using the move command. So I didn't use move edge, I used just the command move. Or you can also select like a single edge and move it. So again, I'm just using the command move. And there I adjusted that piece. Okay. So let's say this is our stool frame. We're satisfied with the dimensions and everything, and we want to go ahead and make a set of drawings from it. Now, in the example that is given for this particular design, there's a set of what are called connection details, which are like these kind of really close-in drawings that show how particular things connect to each other. For example, how the seat of the stool would connect to the frame. Now, that I would not recommend you generate from a 3D model, or that you model bolts and nuts and stuff like that, for example. I would recommend you just draw that kind of thing. But for the other drawings, like a plan and a section and an elevation and an axonometric, we're going to just generate them from our 3D model. So in order to do that, we would go into front view here. And I have moved mine, so I would have to reset the viewport. I'll go to the top left of the viewport there, go to set view and go to front. And then we could do a make 2D. So I'll select my model, type in make 2D. There's a couple options we could select here. We don't need hidden lines. We don't need scene silhouette. If you did model it with separate layers, you probably want to use this option, maintain source layers. And that should be fine. I'll just click OK. And remember, it'll show up in top view near the origin of your file. I'll reset my top view to top. And I'm going to move all this stuff out of the way. Now we should be seeing in our layers panel like new layers appear, right? So we'll deal with that in a minute. First, I'm just going to generate all the drawings. And we could also do a make 2D and right view. Okay. So we're seeing the stool from the side. And we could do one from the top. So make 2D. It's quite straightforward, obviously. There. Sometimes, yeah, Make2D will remove lines that you want to be there, or maybe you don't want them to be there. I don't know. In this case, we might, well, we could use our elevation as reference, but in any case. And then if I wanted to do a plan that cut away the seat so you could see the frame, the stool frame from the top. In fact, let's say I wanted to do one that was cutting through like the middle of the stool frame, looking down, like a floor plan in a sense. I could create a clipping plane. Let me go back into perspective here. So I want my clipping plane about halfway up. Go back to top view, Make2D. And just remember, if you clipped one of your views that you're trying to see your Make2D in, it might not appear. Like if you do a section, for example, it might not appear. Okay, so there's our basic set of drawings. Now, we also want to do a axonometric drawing that shows kind of all the pieces and how they come together. So first I'm going to put my view in 3D here. Now you can do that by, in the top left corner, set view, isometric. And then once you're in isometric, you can always orbit. It doesn't have to be a true isometric, it just needs to be an axonometric. But we probably want to actually, we're going to explode the parts so you can kind of see how they all relate to each other. So first things first, and I have the gumball on here, I'm going to pull this up out of the way. Again, the distance that they are apart doesn't matter as much as the fact that we can clearly see what's going on. So I might even, if I zoom down a little further here, we could pull this stuff up. Right? And we could pull one of these out and show that. Yeah, so that looks pretty good. And then I would go ahead and select all that stuff, and just in the view I'm in the 3D view, I would type Make2D. Okay. All right, so there's our exploded axon. And I guess you maybe want to make a copy of your model so you don't have to like put it back together afterwards. You can, I should have mentioned before I moved my viewport. So if I press home on the keyboard, I can go back in my viewport movements. I'm just pressing over and over. That's about where we were. I'm just going to save that just in case we want to do it again, or if you need to change anything. All right. That's in my named views panel, which you can get to by typing named view if you need to open it if you don't see it. All right, so we'll set back into top view here. There's our exploded axon. And then, yeah, like I mentioned before, I wouldn't bother modeling any of the connection details. I would just draw them. So let's do that now. I suppose the other thing you probably want to do, sorry, before I get to that, is we're going to make something called a cut sheet, right? We want to make a drawing that shows what are all the pieces and parts of our model here. So again, like I mentioned before, we really only have two different types of part to the frame, and we only have one seat. So I'm going to rotate these. I want these to kind of be all in the same orientation so that it's easier to understand. All right, and I'm going to do this just in, normally you wouldn't, oops, I mean to do that, but anyway, normally you wouldn't do an axonometric of for a cut sheet, but in this case, we are going to do it because, drawing like this piece, for example, is quite complex, right? We have a cutout that's going kind of across one face and two cutouts going across a different face. So rather than drawing that in like multiple dimensions, we're just going to draw it once. And so we'll put it in Axon, we'll do a Make2D, and that'll be our basis for our cut sheet. I'm just going to line these up a little bit here, and then I'll go ahead and do a Make2D of this. That'll be our cut sheet later on. All right. Oh yeah, and I forgot to mention, although I should have done this, when you do a make 2D, if I go back to, that's one reason we might want to go back. If I went to this one and do make 2D, this is exactly when you would want to use that option, scene silhouette, right, to get a profile line for your axon. So I will place this one. Anyway, so I'll show you that in a minute, but before we get to that, I want to just talk about how to draw these connection details. So, basically when you draw a connection detail, you want to draw all the typical connections. And what that means is, when this part comes into that part, that's the same exact condition that you have everywhere where, one of these attaches to one of these, where a vertical attaches to a horizontal. The only other type of condition, or the only other type of connection you have in the frame is this, right? Where the two are crossing each other in the middle, which would actually look pretty similar in a drawing, but we'll draw it anyway. And then the third type, which would be where you would actually show like hardware and stuff like that, would be the seat attaching to the frame. So we're just going to draw, when you draw a connection detail, you really want to be focused on the connection itself. So in this scenario, we're actually thinking about the hardware, or, this frame, when it's constructed, has like a pin, a dowel that goes through the lap joint that holds that, locks that piece together, locks those two pieces together. So we want to draw that. So I'm just going to draw it 2D. I'll go into top view here. Over to the right, I'll draw a rectangle, 1.5 inches square. So that's the cross section of our part, right? If I were to draw a line down the middle, so we can imagine if we were to, cut through one of these joints, and we're looking in this direction, kind of in the direction of the horizontal member, what we would see is we would actually see the vertical member going down. We would see, let me just explode the original rectangle there. Oops, why didn't I explode? And I'll trim away half the bottom line. So you would see, if we're cutting through the vertical, we would see something like this, right? We would see the vertical arm or the vertical leg reaching up to the horizontal, and those two coming together. And then we would also see the dowel or the pin that attaches the two of them. I'll draw a line straight across the center. It should be 1/8 of an inch, or sorry, it should be 1/4 of an inch, so I'll offset to 1/8. Okay. And again, I would just trim that line in the middle, because remember, we're cutting right through the actual connection, right through the bolt or the pin or whatever it is. Now, if we're cutting through this connection in the middle here, then what do we see? Again, I'll draw a 1.5 inch square. So obviously in one direction, we would actually just see the stool, or we'd see the cross member continue. And in the other direction, we'd see the cross section of that member. Oops, didn't mean to do that. Okay, so we'd see something like that, right? Now, typically you have this thing kind of cut off. We don't need to know what's going on way over there. It's just about that single connection. So you can draw one of those little zigzaggy lines. I like to draw a line just wherever I want to cut off the drawing, basically. And then I'll use the command line. So not polyline, but just line. I'll choose the option bisector, I think it is. Nope, I was wrong. Both sides, sorry. Yeah, but both sides. And I'm holding shift. I'm just going to draw a straight line there. And I'll draw my little zigzaggy line. I'll rotate it from one side to the other to copy it. Trim the whole thing, right? Join it. Then I could turn the points on. Sorry, I would select both at the same time. Scale them so they're. You want this line to kind of extend past where it's cutting, so that it's clear that it's not like part of the drawing. It's just the cut off the drawing. So I would move that over a little bit. And then I would copy it to the other side as well, so it's kind of evenly spaced. And I like to make sure it's like facing the same direction, but that doesn't matter too much. Then you would use that to actually literally just trim your drawing. So sorry, move that over here. Same thing there, right? I would just cut off. So that, sort of implies that this thing continues, but that the drawing is cut away. And finally, I'll draw the bolted connection. So one of these, perspective here. One of these cross members has a bolt that goes, is drilled, out of the kind of space between those two joints. It goes through the seat, through the cross member, and then there's a nut and a washer underneath that holds the things together. I'll draw that, just like there's a little version of it there, right? Okay. So once again, we'll draw the cross-section of the member, 1.5" square, 1.5, enter. And I'm just hitting enter twice to use that same dimension both times. And then we would want to show the seat. Seat comes across somewhere. Again, we could use this. And seat is, I forget, it was 3/8. We'll make it 3/8. Make sure that's, oops, copy it. Make sure that's evenly spaced. Okay, so select those and trim. So that's our seat. That's where we're cutting away because that continues and we don't need to see it. And then we would want to draw that bolt coming through, right? So first we'll draw the center line of the bolt. We would draw the real dimension of the bolt. So let's say we're using a 2-inch bolt. I could probably use like a 2 1/4 or 2.5. Okay. And you can actually go online and look up, the dimensions of the head of the screw and the diameter of the screw. Again, you want to specify what type of connector this is. But you don't need to, you want to figure out that it's actually going to work, right? That it's not going to be like too wide or, it'll reach through both the pieces, but you don't need to like get too crazy about drawing it accurately. So we would take that, offset it. If we're using a 1/4 20 bolt, we're going both sides, 1/8 of an inch. Okay, so there's our bolt. That's the kind of threaded part of the bolt. And we would draw the head of the screw. So I'm going to use the line. Again, I don't know if I did that well or not, but there you go. Okay, what's going on here? Really tiny line somehow. Line both sides. There we go. Let's try that. Okay. And well, actually, let's imagine it's countersunk. Go to like there. Oops. Why? So I'm just mirroring it. Use the option copy. Okay. Brilliant. So now we can maybe make this like 2. I don't know. Okay, and then I would also draw the washer. So that would go. We would use the command line, both sides. And you can look up proper dimensions for all this stuff. I don't know what it would be. 16, maybe. A little small. Okay, and we would draw the nut as well. For that, I'll just copy this rectangle, scale it to what I want. Give or take. Alrighty. So now we have all the lines established. Now, what you want to do, like with any drawing, is line weight these. So with all our 2D drawings made, the next step in the process will be to add line weights, add hatches, add labels and dimensions, and lay them out. So I'll continue this in the next video.